Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday afternoon, and thank you very much for taking the time to join me on this afternoon's webinar. We're going to look at NQA's Net Zero Aligned service. So if you have any questions as we go, please feel free to type them into the questions box. You'll find that on the control panel. Type them in as you go, or if you prefer, leave them until the end. We should have around about 45 minutes this afternoon, perhaps 30-35 minutes of me talking, and there should be enough time at the end for me to take any questions you might have. So feel free to type them in as we go, and I hope you enjoy this afternoon's webinar. So just a little bit of background to NQA first. So most of you, I imagine, will be familiar with who we are and what we do. NQA are a UCAS accredited certification and verification body. So we deliver ISO management systems certification and verification services throughout the world, headquartered here in the UK. You can see in the orange box there the kind of ISO standards that we're involved in. My role in the business, I'll let you give you an introduction to me very shortly, but my role is the Carbon and Sustainability Services Director. So I look after the delivery of all our different carbon and sustainability verification services, and you can see there ISO 14064-1, which is our carbon quantification and reporting standard, Net Zero Aligned, which we're going to discuss today, PAS 2060 and ISO 14068-1 are carbon neutrality standards. PAS 2080 is the carbon management in buildings and infrastructure standard. ISO 21221 is the event sustainability standard, and ISO 26000 is the social responsibility standard. So I look after the delivery of all of those. I'm also a lead auditor or lead greenhouse gas verifier for all of those myself as well. And of course, we also deliver quality, environmental health and safety, information security and energy management system audits against the relevant ISO standards, as well as lots of other ISO standards as well. But NQA are quite a big organisation. We're the third biggest certification and verification body in the UK, but very, very big global presence these days. So in America, for example, we're #1 certification body in aerospace. In China, we're the #1 certification body in the automotive sectors, and lots of presence in India and the Far East and throughout the EU as well. So just a little introduction to myself. So I'm Stephen Burt. I'm the Carbon and Sustainability Services Director here at NQA. I've got a wealth of experience in all things carbon, net zero, energy and environmental management. I've worked in industry, I've worked in consultancy, and more recently I've worked with NQA, started out as an auditor and nowadays Carbon and Sustainability Services Director. My background, my education is entirely environmental and energy and sustainability related. I'm in the middle of my PhD at the minute, which is focused on greenhouse gas data for demonstrated net zero, which is relevant to what we're discussing today. And as I also mentioned, I'm a lead greenhouse gas verifier and also a lead auditor here at NQA. And I also sit on the technical committees that have input into the development of existing and new ISO standards for greenhouse gas and environmental schemes as well. So that's just a little bit of background to myself. So the learning objectives for this webinar, we'll try to gain an understanding of the context and the background to why companies make commitments to net zero. So we'll run through, why it's important, what the drivers are, what the business benefits of making net zero commitments might be. And then we'll move on and have a look at NQA's Net Zero Aligned service itself. I'll explain what it's about, where it's come from. I'll explain how it works, what kind of organisations it might be intended for, and we'll run through NQA's arrangements for the delivery of the Net Zero Aligned service as well. So just to start with a bit of context and background then. So the background to net zero and the drivers for it obviously is to do with global warming and the greenhouse gas effect that's caused by global warming gases that are released into the atmosphere. So these two graphs show us quite nicely, we'll get a bit scientific here, but these two graphs show us quite nicely what the issue is. So the graph on the left shows us proxy or indirect measurements of carbon dioxide concentration in the Earth's atmosphere over, going all the way back to 800,000 years ago. And the way that they can measure that indirectly or by proxy is by taking ice core data, melting the ice, and then the carbon dioxide that was in the atmosphere at that particular moment in time, they can measure what the concentration was. So we can see for millennia, all the way up until about 1911, we can see that the carbon dioxide concentration in the Earth's atmosphere never went above 300 parts per million. And then in 1911, that was the first time they had a measurement of it going above 300 parts per million, which was, shortly after industrialization, really, in terms of these timescales. And then in 1958, they began monitoring carbon dioxide levels in the Earth's atmosphere using modern instruments. And you can see from the graph just the very, very steep increase in the concentration levels. And then the graph on the right shows us the 1958 all the way up until March 2025 data. So that comes from it's NASA data, and again we can see the increase, continued increase in the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The most recent measurement, I like to look at things like this on the NASA website, is 428 parts per million, which is just from a couple of months ago in March 2025. So we've very much got an increasing level of carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. And then if we look similarly at global average temperature increases, this graph shows us the data from 1850 all the way up till 2023. And what it shows is essentially a correlation, a corresponding increase to the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere itself. So all of this has led to an agreement between the world's nations, the Paris Agreement, to try to hold the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, and to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. That statement is what we call a science-based target. We're attempting, that's all science-based targets, which I'll cover in a little more detail later, are based around contributing at an organizational level or at national level to that particular overarching goal from the Paris Agreement. And if we look on the right-hand side of that graph, we can see that for the first time ever in, I think it was 2023, the global temperature anomaly exceeded the 1.5 degree target that was laid out in the Paris Agreement. So that's the first time it's ever happened. So you can kind of hopefully see the correlation between global average temperature, carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere, and obviously the kind of urgency about the situation. So scientists agree, therefore, that the most critical issue facing our planet is climate change. The UK government led the way very effectively. It was the first country in the world to establish a statutory commitment for the country to reach net zero by 2050. What does net zero mean? Well, it's really there's a little diagram there that tries to explain it. Carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are generated naturally within the Earth cycles, and also they're generated by human-made greenhouse gas emissions. And then there's also greenhouse gas removal processes, which are both natural, and there are some human-made removal processes very much in their infancy that remove carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere itself. And then the state of net zero is generated when the emissions which are generated are removed in an equal amount, and that's the status of net zero itself. So the UK's own net zero commitment, it's a legally binding one. It's in keeping with the science-based targets. In other words, what we've just looked at about capping it at 2 degrees and aiming for capping it at 1.5 degrees temperature increase compared to pre-industrial levels. Because the UK government has this target, it lays out carbon budget delivery plans around how it's going to achieve the target itself. And then that plan begins to be felt by companies and organisations within the UK. So the drivers for decarbonisation for companies and for NQA's clients, to a lesser extent, to be honest, it's regulatory, it's policy changes, but to a much greater extent, it's supply chain pressures, it's stakeholder expectations. So you may already be feeling the pressure coming from your customers. It comes from the very top, and that's generally increasing. And over time, as we as a country progress towards 2050, the regulatory and the policy landscape will change as well, and those kind of pressures might be felt by your business too. So all of this is leading many companies to make public commitments to net zero. However, it's not very transparent how those companies are performing against their own net zero targets. There is one website called Net Zero Tracker, which holds the world's largest 2,000 companies to account against their net zero targets. So this is about as transparent as we get when companies report their progress against their own internal net zero targets. And we can see that the uptake of net zero targets is quite significant. About 2/3, 65% of the annual revenue of those companies is covered by a net zero target. But what this data also shows is that only 1 in 6, so about 16% of those world's largest 2,000 companies are actually on track to reach their net zero target, which is usually 2050. So there's lots and lots of companies making commitments to net zero and reporting their net zero target, but there's very, very few companies who are actually on track to achieve their net zero target currently. And then of those 2,000 world's largest companies, 82 of them are based in the UK and have set net zero targets. And of those UK-based ones, only 8 of them, only around about 10%, have got a suitably detailed plan to achieve their net zero target. Around 60% of them have a partially detailed plan, and 30% of them don't have any plan or don't have a detailed plan to achieve their own internal net zero targets. So this is a great website to look at. It kind of encourages accountability and transparency for all of our largest companies around their performance against their own net zero target itself. It's a kind of red, amber, green system. It's worth a look if you haven't seen it already. So the benefits of setting net zero targets then. I mentioned the supply chain pressures earlier on, so obviously an improved competitive advantage can be gained through net zero targeting, as can a reduction of risks for winning new business and retaining existing business through your own supply chains. As the regulatory framework in the UK progresses, policy and regulatory compliance, you're probably some of you may already be having to report your greenhouse gas emissions, perhaps via ESOS, perhaps via SECR legislation, perhaps through climate change levy agreements, and that landscape of regulatory compliance will, over the next couple of decades become more important and become applicable to far more companies, including small to medium-sized companies. And then we shouldn't forget as well environmental improvement and long-term business sustainability. So, acting to decarbonize, acting to work towards a net zero target obviously leads to environmental improvement, and the knock-on effect of that is improved climate resilience. So long-term business sustainability, especially when supply chains are so long these days, it's an important consideration for that as well. So other than the net zero tracker website, which I just showed you, there's often a lack of transparency or accountability in how companies report their progress against their net zero target. So not whether they've set one or not, but whether, how they report their progress and whether they're on track to achieve it. And that's all despite it being a major stakeholder requirement in tenders and related reporting as well. There are, of course, some schemes which provide levels of assurance for a company's journey to net zero. Sometimes those can be costly schemes. What those services generally involve is some level of verification, firstly, that the company's greenhouse gas emissions have been quantified correctly, that the net zero targets they've set are in keeping with the science-based targets, and to a much lesser extent the progress that they're making against those targets. Often those existing or alternative schemes are focused on what we call scope 1, so direct greenhouse gas emissions, and scope 2, energy and direct greenhouse gas emissions only. And sometimes there's some inclusion of some scope 3, which is supply chain indirect categories, and sometimes there's not. And often the business, the company, it's a simple submission process on an annual basis via a portal. So you submit your greenhouse gas data. Sometimes that's verified by the organizations offering these services. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just taken as read that it's correct. And no site visits might be undertaken as part of that verification process. For example, many of these schemes aren't accredited by UCAS like NQA are for greenhouse gas verification services, and often the work is undertaken to the scheme's own internal standards, so not to the international ISO standards which NQA offer. And that also relates to the competency of the greenhouse gas verifiers undertaking the work. So, myself and my team of greenhouse gas verifiers at NQA, we all have to operate within a very strict regulatory framework in terms of our own competency and how we deliver the verifications themselves. So overall, there's a lack of availability of a mechanism to provide really robust and credible levels of assurance against a company's net zero targets and the progress which they're making against those targets. So there's generally a lack of credibility, a lack of a robust mechanism, transparency. A big part of third-party audits which we undertake is that they're independent, they're impartial, they're objective. There's a lack of availability of net zero verification schemes from formal verification and certification bodies. And there's a lack of UCAS accreditation around it as well. There's a lack of it being focused on ISO standards, and often they're not being undertaken to the required ISO competency requirements. So what can be done about this? So NQA's net zero aligned service has been developed in response to this to try to introduce those levels of credibility and robustness and impartiality and objectivity and so on. So we'll have a quick look through the background to it next. So the name Net Zero Aligned, it's intentional, and the reason for that is probably in 2027 now, the International Standards Organization, ISO, will launch a new standard. That standard will be called ISO 14060, Net Zero Aligned Organizations. It may be late 26, it's more likely to be 2027 before it's actually launched formally now. And the purpose of that new ISO standard will be to enable organizations to demonstrate that they're aligned to their own net zero targets, and therefore in turn aligned to the global and their own national net zero targets. So my thoughts on this are that ISO 14060 is likely to become a sort of business as usual standard in the way that, you know, ISO 9001, for example, quality management system standard, is more or less, you know, necessary to operate these days as a business of a certain size in certain sectors. So this is a look ahead to ISO 14060 when it's launched. NQA have called our service Net Zero Aligned because it will prepare you for the launch of ISO 14060 when that becomes available. ISO 14060 will be based on an existing ISO document, so it's called IWA 42. It's net zero guidelines, and that's available now. Anybody can get a hold of that and download it for free, and it lays out how to, its guidelines. It's not a specification, it's guidelines on how to align your organization against their net zero targets. So ISO's IWA 42, the net zero guidelines, what it requires you to do is establish and quantify what your scope 1, 2 and 3 greenhouse gas emissions are, to establish a baseline for those, to establish what the boundary, the organizational and the reporting boundary that you're working to are. It will refer to another standard, ISO 14064-1, which is the existing current international standard for greenhouse gas quantification and reporting. So IWA 42, the very first step in it is to use ISO 14064-1 to quantify your greenhouse gas emissions. And by doing that, it makes sure that what you've done is accurate. It makes sure that you've accurately and comprehensively identified all the emission sources and quantified them within the boundary of your own organizational activities. The next step is to establish a science-based pathway to those net zero targets. So it sounds complicated, but it's not. It's there's freely available tools out there, science-based targeting tools that you can easily get a hold of and download. And your input to those tools, it's an Excel-based format. You type in what your scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions are, and what your net zero target is. It's a little more complicated than this, but this is the essence of it. And it provides a nice graph that lays out what your pathway to net zero should be. So that's the second phase in IWA 42. And then obviously we need to establish a mitigation plan towards decarbonisation overall. As we progress towards net zero, we'll counterbalance using, you know, high quality greenhouse gas removals, the residual emissions which are still being emitted. We'll actually have greenhouse gas removal mechanisms for those, and then we'll measure and monitor, we'll communicate and report, and we'll improve over time. So that's the background to ISO's existing net zero guidelines, which will form the basis of the new ISO 14060 standard, the Net Zero Aligned Organizations one, when it's launched in late 26 or early 27. But the interesting part to note in this is that the very first step, and probably the one with the most amount of work, is to quantify your greenhouse gas emissions using ISO 14064-1. So NQA offer our Net Zero Aligned service. It's a two-phase process. So phase one, we are a UCAS accredited verification body for both ISO 14064-1 for quantifying and reporting greenhouse gas emissions, and for ISO 14068-1, which is the transition to net zero carbon neutrality standard. And phase one relies on the use of those two standards to accurately quantify all of the greenhouse gas emission sources which are directly or which your organization is directly or indirectly responsible for. And by using those standards, it provides an independently verified greenhouse gas baseline to align to net zero target. So we know that the data is correct at this stage because it's been verified against the ISO standard. And what that means is that existing NQA clients who are currently verified to 14064 or 14068, or even new ones that could come to NQA if they've already been verified to the same standards by another UCAS accredited verification body, those clients can usually proceed directly to phase two. And the output from phase one is what we call a verification opinion statement. So it's a bit like an ISO certificate, but there's a lot more detail on it, and it provides for NQA's opinion on your greenhouse gas quantification process. So once phase one is complete, you know your numbers are correct, and you can then proceed to phase two, which is a certification audit for net zero alignment. So this involves NQA conducting audits against the ISO IWA 42, the net zero guidelines, and that confirms that your organization is on track to meet its net zero goals. It lets you be able to demonstrate that you're on track to meet your net zero goals. The evaluation of progress towards net zero is against the science-based targets, but also against, reduction, greenhouse gas mitigation milestones that you establish internally. And the phase two audits, I should point out, they're dependent on phase one being complete, and they follow on after continued annual verification in phase one against the two accredited ISO standards. And the end output from phase two is a certificate which demonstrates that you're compliant with the net zero aligned service, and therefore you're able to demonstrate to your customers that you're on the right path. So it's got a number of benefits, the net zero aligned service. There's an element of future proofing about it, because as I mentioned, I think ISO 14060 will become a business as usual standard. So it prepares your organization for the forthcoming ISO 14060 standard. Because 14060 will be based on the IWA 42, the guidelines, then it gives you a sure foot in the door towards certification or verification against ISO 14060 when that comes along. Lots of companies like to be the first to achieve a new ISO standard when it comes along, and this is designed to help you to progress towards that. It also provides a high level of technical credibility because it's backed by globally recognized ISO standards. It's backed by NQA's UCAS accredited carbon quantification and reporting standards and service, and it makes sure that, to start off with, that your client, the carbon footprint quantification that you've done is correct and accurate, and your alignment to net zero is correct and accurate, and also transparent as well. It's transparent, the progress that you're making. It enables market leadership as well, and allows for a competitive advantage just by demonstrating that you're making real and accountable progress towards net zero. Gives your stakeholders confidence that you're doing the right thing as a business, and it also provides strategic insight. So it gives access to myself and my team of greenhouse gas verifiers for expert analysis, input to your process, recommendations, and helping you to demonstrate that your net zero strategy is on track. So lots of benefits available from doing this. So if anybody needs any kind of further information and support, feel free to contact me directly. You can find me on LinkedIn and other places, or via NQA's website. But on our website, NQA's external facing website, we have what we call a microsite, a sustainability microsite, and there's loads of really good information on there: blogs, quick reads, fact sheets, webinars, case studies as well. For those of you out there who are consultants, you might be interested in our associate partner program, whereby we can provide NQA clients who are looking for a consultant with your details for those areas that you have expertise in. So there's lots and lots of really good carbon, greenhouse gas, sustainability related information on that website, which might be of interest to you. So that brings us to the end for this afternoon. So more than happy to take any questions. If anybody has any anything to think about. So Barry's asked an interesting one with a political angle. If the Reform Party are voted in 3.5 years' time, its pledge is to abandon net zero. What are your thoughts, please? Well, you can kind of, Barry, probably guess from my background. I'm a scientist, you know. My philosophy in life is about following the science, and the science, as we saw at the very start of these slides, indicates very, very clearly to me and to the overwhelming number of scientists out there that the evidence supports the approach that's been taken. Yep, the Reform Party might well look to abandon net zero. I don't know much about their policies, to be honest. That might be one of the things that they do. Yeah, it should be seen as an opportunity for the country. Do you know, we've already seen some fantastic improvements. I've got some data, right? And since 1990, this country, the UK, has reduced its greenhouse gas emissions by 40%, and that's relative to 1990, and it's almost entirely as a result of decarbonisation of how we generate energy. And at the same time, the economy has grown by 2/3. So, you know, if you look at the growth in GDP from 1990 to 2024, and then if you look at the reduction in national greenhouse gas emissions between 1990 and 2024, greenhouse gas emissions have gone right down, GDP has gone right up. So the two are not mutually exclusive at all. There's opportunities there from an economic point of view, and obviously there's opportunities there from a climate resilience point of view. We just, you know, businesses are being impacted left, right and centre by climate change at the minute, and the science shows that that's only going to get worse as well. Diane's asked a question: is it right that ISO 14060 will pick up standards like Planet Mark? I don't think it will pick up standards like Planet Mark. It might provide an alternative to Planet Mark. You know, NQA's business is ISO standards, independent, impartial, third-party accredited verification to ISO standards. So we're focused on the international, the globally recognized ISO standards is the way that we do things. I don't know whether it will replace other standards or not. Richard's asked, do we provide support with verification of PAS 2080? We do. PAS 2080 is a big thing for us at the minute. There's lots of demand for it. So certainly, Richard, that's something that NQ are involved in and can help with. And you've mentioned, is it for public sector clients? And yes. I mean, the public sector are often what PAS 2080 calls asset owner managers, so housing stock and highways and various infrastructure assets that are owned by the public sector, and that's exactly who PAS 2080 is aimed at. So if I can help you with that, feel free to give me a shout, Richard. Okay, good. I don't think we have any further questions at the minute, but If anybody wants to ask anything else, just feel free to type it in just now. Nope, I don't think we've got any. So that was nice, short and sweet. Hopefully that's given you a nice background to NQA's Net Zero Aligned service and a bit of the science behind it as well. So listen, thank you very much indeed for attending this afternoon. I appreciate it. And as I said, if any of you have any further questions or need any further detail, always feel free to give me a shout, or my colleagues at NQA give us a shout, and I'll be more than happy to talk you through the process. Okay, thank you very much. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.